let's just jump right in with a pretty wild thought. What if that hidden part of your mind, your unconscious, what if it wasn't just some chaotic pit of instincts and random desires? What if it was actually as structured and as intricate as language itself? That is the challenging and frankly brilliant idea from the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan that we're going to get into today.
Now, I'm not going to lie, tackling Lacan can feel like you're trying to navigate a maze in the dark. But here's the thing. That difficulty, it's not a bug, it's a feature. The source material itself tells you his writing has to be traversed, to be deciphered, not just casually read. So think of this as our map. We're going to walk through this labyrinth together, step by step. So here's our game plan. First, we'll step into the labyrinth and get our bearings. Then, we'll find our master key, a deceptively simple little algorithm. With that key in hand, we're going to unlock the two main pathways of language, see how they let us decipher dreams, and finally understand why the smallest little thing, the letter, actually holds all the power.
So let's start with the big question that underpins all of this. What if you're unconscious? All your slips of the tongue, your dreams, the very patterns of your desire. What if it isn't chaos? What if it's a language you've been speaking your entire life without ever even knowing the grammar? This slide really lays out the massive shift Lacan was proposing. The old school view basically saw the unconscious as this tangled, messy basement of raw animal instinct. But Lacan comes along and says, hold on, Freud didn't just find a messy basement. He found an unconscious that's structured exactly like a language, with its own rules, its own syntax, its own way of making sense. Okay, so to explore this new linguistic map of the mind, we're going to need a master key. And lucky for us, Lacan provides one. He borrows it and tweaks it a bit from the brilliant linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. This tiny formula, S over S, is the key to unlocking everything that follows.
First piece of the puzzle, the signifier, with a capital S. This is just the physical stuff of language. It's the sound waves of the word tree hitting your eardrum, or the letters TREE that you see on the screen. It's the word as a material thing. Simple as that.
And then we have its partner, the signified with a lowercase s. This is the concept, the mental image that pops into your head. So you hear this signifier tree, and your brain conjures up a general idea of a tall plant with leaves and a trunk. That's the signified. Seems straightforward enough, right? Well, it's the relationship between these two that changes the entire game.
Now we get to the most important part, that little line, the bar. It is not just a fraction line. Lacan calls it a barrier, and he means it. It shows that the link between the word tree and the concept of a tree is never perfect, never stable. There's always a gap, a little bit of wiggle room, a potential for slippage. And it's right there in that gap, that instability, that the unconscious does its best work.
And here it is, the whole algorithm, S over S. Lacan very deliberately puts the signifier on top. Why? To show that it has priority. It means that meaning doesn't come from some fixed concept down below. Instead, meaning is just an effect that's constantly sliding and shifting underneath the endless chain of words we speak, hear, and think.
Let's make this super concrete. The whole tree points to a tree idea is actually a bad example because it makes it seem like the link is natural and stable. A much, much better illustration is these two doors. The doors themselves are identical, physically. The only thing that gives them meaning is the difference between the two signifiers on them. Ladies and gentlemen, meaning is created by the relationships between words, not by words pointing to things in the real world.
Okay, so if meaning is always slipping and sliding along this chain of words, how does it actually move? Well, Lacan says it travels along two fundamental highways, the two core operations of language. And those two paths are metonymy and metaphor. You can think of it like this. Metonymy is like moving sideways, word to word, along the chain based on connection. Metaphor is more like a vertical jump, swapping one word out for another based on some kind of similarity. And what's so incredible is that Lacan shows how these are the exact same mechanisms Freud found in dreams, displacement and condensation.
So let's take a classic example of metonymy. We spotted 30 sails on the horizon. You hear sails, but you instantly understand ships. Why? Because in our web of language, sail is connected to ship. The part stands in for the whole. This, for Lacan, is the very structure of desire, always moving from one thing to the next along an endless chain, never quite satisfied. That's displacement.
Now for metaphor. You've got this beautiful line from Victor Hugo, where a sheaf of grain is described as if it has human feelings. How does that even work? It works because the word sheaf has been secretly swapped in for another word, the name of the man, Boaz, who is the generous one. One signifier replaces another. And in that moment of substitution, boom, a poetic spark of new meaning is created. This is the logic of the symptom, where tons of meaning gets jammed into a single powerful word. That's condensation.
All right, so we've got our toolkit. We've got the S over S algorithm, we've got metonymy, we've got metaphor. Now let's take these tools and use them to break into Freud's home turf, the place where the unconscious speaks the loudest, our dreams.
Freud's most fundamental insight, the one Lacan really wants us to remember, is that a dream is a rebus. You know, those puzzles where you use pictures to spell out words. The key takeaway here is that a dream isn't some allegory with symbols you can look up. It's a linguistic puzzle that has to be spelled out sound by sound, letter by letter.
And that leads us to a really vital distinction. Most people think interpreting a dream is decoding, like using a cipher key. But Lacan says no. The real work is deciphering. You're not just translating a known code. You are basically an archaeologist trying to figure out a lost, forgotten language that is totally unique to the person who dreamt it. The goal isn't just to find the meaning, it's to reveal the structure itself.
The source material gives us the perfect analogy for this: Egyptian hieroglyphs. When an Egyptologist sees a picture of a vulture in a text, they don't think, this text is about vultures. They know that image is a letter. It represents the sound aleph. Its value comes from its place in the linguistic system, not from what it looks like. And that is exactly how our dreams work. The images in our dreams are letters in a script, and they are waiting to be read, not interpreted like a painting.
So this brings us to our final and maybe our most profound point. We've talked about all these big structures and chains of words, but why does this tiny little unit, the letter, hold so much power over us?
You've probably heard that old saying, the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. The idea is that if you get too hung up on the literal text, the rigid code, you kill the living, breathing meaning. Lacan knows this saying, but then he flips it right on its head. He asks, okay, sure, but without the letter, without the code, how would the spirit even live? How would it exist? The spirit needs the letter to even have a form.
And this is the truly radical conclusion. The letter, that material machinery of language, is what produces the effects of truth in us. Our deepest truths, our symptoms, our desires, they don't just bubble up from some authentic inner spirit. They are effects generated by the mechanics of language operating within us, almost completely without our knowledge.
So we end up with a whole new definition of the unconscious. For Lacan, it's not some hidden, primitive ocean of instinct. The unconscious is the structure of language itself, operating inside of you, but without you at the steering wheel. What Freud discovered wasn't just a hidden mind. He discovered that this hidden structure thinks, it speaks, and it desires, all according to the logic of the letter.
Which leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending thought to sit with. If our own personal truth is an effect produced by this intricate code, by this web of signifiers that we're all born into, then what exactly is written in yours? Thanks for making it through the labyrinth with me.